The Pediatric Committee of the National Academy of Medicine presents To Invest in the First 1,000 Days of Life, a Key for a Healthy Life. Introduction, Dr. Enriqueta Sileo. Fetal Programming, Dr. María José Castro. Brain Development, Dr. José Antonio Daly. Role of the Obstetrician in Prenatal Maternal Nutrition, Dr. Alfredo Caraballo. And the First 1,000 Days, a Challenge, Dr. López de Blanco. The first 1,000 days of life. It is a stage of vulnerability that comprises the 270 days of pregnancy, the 365 days of the first year, and the 365 days of the second year. The first 1,000 days in the life course is a new paradigm and a critical window that should consider care during pregnancy up to 2 years of age, epigenetics, nutrition, brain development, and metabolic programming. The challenge is to change this critical window into a window of opportunities. All that you do or not do during this period will have a future repercussion. Chronic undernutrition in the first year will produce irreversible consequences in brain development. This is the brain scan of a normal 3-year-old on the left, and on the right, a 3-year-old malnourished child's brain scan. If the circle is not broken, transmission will occur from generation to generation. Developmental origins of health and disease, DOHAD. Cardiometabolic diseases are nowadays believed to have their origin in the first 1,000 days of life. This is the great interest in this period at this precise moment. There is a greater interest in high blood pressure in children since 2004. In the US, 3.5% of children have hypertension and 10 to 11% high BP readings. Young people with high BP readings present vascular aging, and by 2022, more children and adolescents aged 5 to 19 will be obese rather than underweight if the current trends continues. To invest in the first 1,000 days of life, a key for a healthy life, will assure a healthy old age.
Fetal programming. The term early origin of adult diseases refers to the impact of environmental factors, especially nutritional factors that act in the early stages of life. Programming risks that lead to early onset of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases in adult life, increasing the chance of premature death. These types of entities cause 60% of global mortality. The metabolic changes evidences in the human being in his evolution could be associated to modifications in his surroundings. The human population of the Paleolithic period used to practice hunting, gathering, and nomadic life, which would condition a diet rich in fiber and lean protein, and low in fat and carbohydrates without any processing, such as cooking or grinding, in addition to high physical activity derived from the collection, hunting, and migrations. In the Neolithic period, the settlements begin, and then food products from planting and animal husbandry are integrated into the diet, and food processing begins, decreasing the fiber content and increasing the content of high glycemic index, carbohydrate, and saturated fats. The term thrifty genotype refers to genes selected in times of shortage that lead to insulin release and increase fat storage capacity. These modifications are harmful if postnatal conditions improve. The developmental plasticity means that a single genotype can cause several phenotypes in response to environmental conditions. The characteristics of these programmed responses depend on the nature of the stimulus or injury, the time of exposure, and the time of occurrence of this injury. Critical periods are those in which specific nutritional disturbances cause long-term changes in development and adverse evolution in later periods of life. If early malnutrition occurs, the effect will be permanent, while if late malnutrition occurs, the effect may be transient. The concept of metabolic programming would explain that adaptive embryonic and fetal responses in a suboptimal environment generate permanent adverse consequences. If permanent changes occurs in sensitive periods, they lead to long-term consequences. The metabolic imprint is generated before adaptive responsive to specific nutritional conditions in life with limited susceptibility to an ontogenic window in early development, with persistent effect during adulthood. Its evolution is measurable and different between individuals, and the response depends on the threshold susceptibility or exposure, both in time and in magnitude. Fetal programming is an adaptation process whereby nutrition and other environmental factors alter the developmental pathways during the period of prenatal growth, thereby inducing changes in postnatal metabolism and susceptibility in adults to chronic disease. These modifications are transmitted to subsequent generations. This fetal programming can be explained by epigenetics, defined as the series of inherited alterations of genetic expression through modification of DNA and central histones without changes in the DNA sequence. These epigenetic modifications alter the structure and condensation of chromatin, affecting the expression of the genotype and phenotype. The epigenetic modifications so far described consist of histone alteration, DNA methylation, mainly in the cytosine guanine pair, and binding to microRNAs. Histone modifications occur in the amino-terminal tail and consist of methylation in the lysine and arginine residues, acetylation or ubiquitination, and sumoylation in lysine residues, and phosphorylation of threonines and serines. Acetylation and methylation of lysine residues are key to activation of repression of transcription. MicroRNAs are sequences of endogenous RNA of approximately 20 non-coding nucleotides, which play a key role as inhibitors of gene expression by blocking translation or degradation of messenger RNA. One of the most vulnerable periods of changes in the structure and function in the fetus is the first trimester, since most of the organs are formed before the 16th week of gestation, so that modifications in this period, when the woman often does not know her condition as a pregnant woman, it can seriously affect the fetus. During the first trimester of pregnancy, caloric requirements are not so important, being more priority the protein and micronutrient intake, whose requirements increase with the genesis of the embryo and the fetus, and throughout pregnancy. Then, in the second and third trimesters, the fetal caloric requirements increase in order to grow, fulfill their vital functions, and generate metabolic deposits. During the early stages of pregnancy, there is a circulatory predominance of insulin, growth factors, especially insulin-like growth factor 2 and thyroxine, which allows the organic genesis of the fetus and tissue again. Subsequently, progressively, they are being replaced by the third trimester with glucocorticoids, leptin, and thyroid hormones, allowing fetal maturation and gain of fetal deposits. The most frequent consequence of malnutrition during pregnancy are tissue cell number reduction, structural modification of organs, the selection of certain cell clones, modification of the adjustment of key hormonal axes, impaired hormonal production, impaired tissue sensitivity to hormones. This causes affectation in the renal, hepatic, pancreatic, muscular, hormonal, adipose, and bone function and structure, among others, resulting in serious situations such as reduction of nephrons, decreased sensitivity to insulin and leptin, decrease in the number of beta cells of the pancreas, impaired appetite regulation, elevated cortisol, and increased systemic vascular resistance, hyperglycemia, and early maturation. All these effects are related to chronic non-communicable diseases. Faced with maternal nutritional and deficiency in nutrients transfers to the fetus, fetal malnutrition occurs, threatening its survival and leading to adaptations to limit growth but prioritizing the development of essential tissues and accelerating maturation, all these accompanying a reduction in secretion and sensitivity of hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis hormones. These changes remain in the fetus and the infant. Glucocorticoids can be a key in the permanent and transgenerational impact of fetal adaptations, in the same way as the interaction between mother, placenta, and fetus. Placental corticotropin-releasing hormone is able to modulate glucose transport by associating its high concentration with fetal growth retardation. This hormone is also involved in the onset of labor, and its synthesis increases with the increase of cortisol, hypoxia, and infections, which is a key role of intrauterine stress conditions and premature delivery or growth retardation. The potential routes in which glucocorticoids influence the fetal epigenome are modification of other systems like thyroid, placental transport of methyl donors, direct action, for example, methylation, action on epigenetic regulatory genes like DNMT, MBD2, modification of the methionine cycle or DNMT, and microRNA. Proteins and nutrients donors of methyl groups in the mother diet, like vitamin B12, folic acid, choline, and betaine, alter the genome's methylation of the fetus and modify the expression of genes related to energy metabolism, influencing resistance to insulin and adiposity in adulthood. Given all above, it can be concluded that the fetal period could be the most vulnerable in human life to changes in the environment in which it develops. Possible interventions that could modify the negative effect of epigenetic changes derived from injuries in the fetus are inhibition of DNA methylation, histone deacetylation, and microRNA depression, modification of epigenetically disturbed metabolic pathway, and C, dietary supplements such as functional amino acids, vitamins, and trace elements. Brain development in the first 1,000 days. The importance of nutrition. Brain development is a stepwise, organized, predetermined process. The brain grows in the first 2 years of age, reaching 80% of adult size and 90% toward the 6th year of life. Glial cells participate in the development, proliferation, differentiation of neurons, the formation of myelin in the axons, and the guidance of cells to their final destination. The brain participates and needs for development. Cognitive development by the creation of thoughts, memories, decisions from infancy and adolescence to adulthood, recollecting and ordering information by perception and thought, using the brain areas of intelligence, reasoning, language, and memory. Nutrients and brain development needed for optimal development, and adequate nutrition is necessary, not in excess or deficit, prior to conception and in the first 1,000 days. Nutrients affect brain development according to the type and cell function of the nutrient needed and the structures at risk. In this table, this is outlined. Macro and micronutrients are both necessary. repercussions in brain development according to nutrient deficiencies. Protein malnutrition, pre- and postnatal, diminishes the effect of neurotransmitters, affects the cellular electrophysiology and their behavior. Prenatal folate deficiency results in neural tube defects. The cerebellum matures postnatally. Any protein deficiency will stop its maturation. In early pregnancy, cellular proliferation predominates. Deficiencies affect the number of cells, while in the early postnatal period, they will affect differentiation, synaptogenesis, and the connectivity of neurons. Repercussions in brain development according to the nutrient. Each nutrient has an optimal range for normal brain development, and any value outside of the range can damage the normal development. A reduction of the pregnant mother feeding can produce a permanent brain dysfunction in cognitive and behavioral aspects. If it is moderate, the fetus compensates with the mother's body reserves. Iron has a minimal toleration range with a slight variation that might result in an abnormal brain development. Zinc, iodine, and other micronutrients have greater tolerance ranges. Iron and brain development. Brain during development needs iron for enzymes and hemoproteins that regulate cellular processes, the synthesis of dopamine, the production of energy in newborns, as well as the fat and long-chain fatty acids, also called LC-PUFAs. Iron deficiency in later gestation produces memory deficits, limits hippocampus function, diminishes the velocity of the neuron action potential, plus alterations of the mother-child interaction due to the dopamine metabolism in children with iron deficit plus anemia, who show difficult learning abilities and conflicting behavior with their caretakers. Nutrition and brain development vulnerability. Conclusions. Brain development is a stepwise process, genetically determined from the womb, modified by the mother's environment. An optimal nutrition, neither deficient nor excessive, is necessary previous to conception and during the first 1,000 days. An important reduction in nutrients during pregnancy can result in permanent brain dysfunction in the cognitive and behavioral levels. If it is moderate, the fetus will nourish at the expense of the mother. Iron has a minimal tolerance range. Other micronutrients have a moderate tolerance.
Role of the obstetrician in antenatal maternal nutrition, Dr. Alfredo Caraballo. As obstetricians, we must accompany pregnant women during the antenatal care. This will have an important impact in the perinatal outcome. In the context of taking the proper decisions that are required during pregnancy and that can lead to an optimal perinatal outcome, one of the aspects in which efforts must be made is nutritional status. Although the ideal scenario would be to know the nutritional status from the preconceptional stage, the reality is that women come to us already pregnant and probably with several weeks elapsed. So, from the first moment, vulnerability must be identified based on the categorization of socioeconomic factors, medical factors, and obstetric factors. And in the following visits, one must take into account the evolution of pregnancy based on the clinical signs of malnutrition, inadequate weight gain, multiple pregnancy, digestive system disorders, and medical pathology that could complicate pregnancy, in addition to the findings of alterations of hemoglobin, hematocrit, and hematometric indices, as well as in serum proteins and glycemia. Although there are different approaches to carry out the nutritional follow-up of the pregnant woman, in practical terms, the recommendation is based on the range of weight gain in response to the body mass index before pregnancy, as well as the follow-up of the new revision of vulnerability factors and a referral to a specialized nutritional evaluation. In 2015, the World Health Organization established the Global Goals for Sustainable Development, which will remain valid until 2030, among which nutritional aspects as well as prenatal care have been considered relevant. This is the World Health Organization Guide on recommendations for pregnant women on the importance of a balanced diet and physical activity during pregnancy, so that they stay healthy and do not gain excessive weight during these months. The goal is a positive pregnancy experience. The pregnant woman increases her energy and nutrient requirements, so that counseling should be aimed at emphasizing the importance of a healthy diet, which contains an adequate amount of energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals, obtained through the intake of various foods, among them vegetables, meat, fish, poultry, nuts, whole grains, and fruits. The 2016 World Health Organization publication updated the guidelines for nutritional aspects during pregnancy based on the revised evidence and established these levels of recommendations. 1. A balanced diet and physical activity is recommended in order to remain healthy and not gain excessive weight. 2. In undernourished populations, nutrition education on increasing daily energy and protein intake on an individual level is also recommended in order to reduce the risk of low birth weight neonates. Also, a balanced energy and protein dietary supplementation is recommended to reduce the risk of stillbirths and small for gestational age neonates. Hyperproteic supplementations in order to improve maternal and perinatal outcomes are not recommended, even in undernourished populations. With regard to iron and folic acid supplementation, the recommendation of a daily oral supplementation with 30 to 60 milligrams of elemental iron and 0.4 milligrams of folic acid is maintained in order to prevent maternal anemia, puerperal sepsis, low birth weight, and preterm birth. Special recommendations on intermittent oral supplementation with 120 milligrams of elemental iron and 2.8 milligrams of folic acid once weekly in order to improve maternal and neonatal outcomes is not acceptable due to side effects in populations with an anemia prevalence below 20% among pregnant women. In populations with a low calcium intake, daily supplementation with 1.5 to 2 grams of oral elemental calcium is recommended in order to reduce the risk of preeclampsia. Vitamin A supplementation is only recommended for pregnant women in areas where deficiency is a serious health problem in order to avoid night blindness. Zinc supplementation for pregnant women is only recommended in the context of clinical research. Based on the evidence reviewed, supplementation with multiple micronutrients, pyridoxine, vitamin C, D, and E in order to improve maternal and perinatal outcomes is not recommended. In pregnant women with a consumption above 300 milligrams per day of caffeine, a decrease in intake is recommended in order to reduce pregnancy loss and infants with low birth weight risk. Adequate prenatal care ensures an optimal perinatal outcome, and the nutritional aspects also become important in the context of the origins and development of health and disease. We are responsible, therefore, for properly monitoring pregnant women on eating habits and on the nutritional value of food, in the selective supplementation recommended, and the monitoring of nutritional status, as well as to guarantee the appropriate interventions to obtain a healthy newborn and the proper conditions that ensure a successful breastfeeding. Thank you to the organizing committee for the opportunity to contribute in this aspect of great relevance in prenatal care and of high significance in the first 1,000 days of life. The first 1,000 days of life, a challenge. The first 1,000 days of life is the new paradigm that determines health and nutrition during the life course, based on epidemiological models that incorporate the concept of epigenetics, term introduced by Waddington, that refers to changes, nutritional or not, that affect the genetic expression without changing the DNA sequence, within the international program called DOHAD, or OTSE, according to the English or the Spanish version, as well as the food and nutrition transition theory. The importance resides in the fact that it is a critical window for prevention in the short term, in terms of the nutritional status, health, and psychomotor development of the newborn, as well as in the long term, due to the occurrence of chronic illnesses, especially cardiometabolic. Barry Popkin in 1993, as an extension of the demographic transition theory of Thompson and Caldwell and the epidemiological transition of Omran, proposed the concept as a direct consequence of urbanization and economic progress. It is a substitution of the traditional diet for one high in saturated fat and sugars and low in fruits and vegetables. The food and nutrition transition in Venezuela, product of an accelerated and anarchic urbanization, started in the 1960s with a rise in the intake of processed foods and a drop in the intake of traditional foods, plus an increase in sedentarism. Also, due to the incorporation of women to the work media, this produced a substitution of the traditional diet for one much more efficient in time and effort. In Venezuela, it is accompanied by demographic and epidemiological changes and transitions, from a demographic pattern of high fertility and high mortality rates to a pattern of low fertility and mortality rates, and from an epidemiological pattern of infections and malnutrition to a pattern of overweight, obesity, and chronic illnesses. Adolescent pregnancies are one of the highest in the region, and 95% occur in the lowest strata, outlining the differences between the middle and upper class girls who have a life project of their own and the lower class girls who do not have a life project of their own. Infant mortality dropped more than 50% at the start of the 20th century and then again 50% at the start of the 21st, yet increased from 1215 onwards at the expense of the neonatal mortality rates. Maternal mortality has never reached an adequate level due to the autochthonous custom of not assisting to adequate prenatal control. This is usual in the lower class women. However, the important rise since 2015 is attributable to the overall health and nutrition crisis in Venezuela. The epidemiologic transition has changed from a pattern of infectious diseases such as the main causes, diarrheas, tuberculosis and malaria in that order, with cardiovascular diseases as the fourth cause of death, to these last as the first cause, followed by cancer in the last centuries. Diabetes has risen as an important cause since 2007. An accelerated transition in the developing countries results in nutritional excess and deficit coexisting. This is called the double burden of nutrition, and a nutritional paradox by researchers such as Doak and Popkin. The Venezuelan Institute of Nutrition in urban boys and girls 7 to 17 years of age found 21 to 22% of overweight, but also 16 to 17% of underweight. This is the double burden of nutrition. The evolution is evident in all the studies and small surveys carried out in the country in the last few years. A rise in undernutrition, in this case up to 28%, and a decrease of overweight, in this case to 1%. Public policies versus academic and private initiatives. Current laws that protect breastfeeding do exist, yet are not obeyed in most part of the population. The project Pan American Health Organization, Ministry of Health, was based on strategies to reduce maternal morbidity and mortality and was implemented in several public hospitals. The agreement, UNICEF Pediatric Society, with its three components, breastfeeding, neonatal assistance, and adolescent assistance, was begun regarding the first two components. The breastfeeding component was implemented in the years 2009 to 2012. Workshops in breastfeeding for mothers, courses in breastfeeding for medical personnel were developed. Data is found up to 2016 only. The neonatal component consisted of workshops directed to physicians and nurses and audiovisual material for parents. The integrated approach to moderate and severe malnutrition, UNICEF, with its two components, house management and hospital management, and its outcome indicators, has recently been implemented. It is too soon to analyze outcome. Other private working groups involved in the prevention of obesity and chronic illnesses are the Bengoa Foundation, the Venezuelan Pediatrics Society, the Venezuelan chapter of the Ibero-American DOHAD, the Venezuelan Foundation of Preventive Cardiology. The second consensus of pediatric nutrition, early nutrition for short-term and long-term health, was coordinated by the Pediatric Society in the person of Dr. Koromoto Tomei. Several societies, among them the Cardiology, Oncology, Endocrinology and Metabolism societies, participated. Project SOGVzla, Developmental Origins of Health and Disease, DOHAD Venezuela, is coordinated by the Bengoa Foundation, the Venezuelan Pediatric Society, CANIA, the Antimano Children's Center of Nutritional Attention, and also by the Obstetrics Society of Venezuela. The objectives: to obtain information on growth and development in the first 1,000 days of life, according to the opinion of physicians involved, to detect risk factors that affect mother and child, to consider the high vulnerability of the population according to the current negative demographic data, and the goal, considering objectives 4 and 5 of the United Nations Millennium Objectives, to reduce child mortality and improve maternal health, and the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, and by means of a national consensus of medical societies and institutions, to elaborate a preventive agenda both for malnutrition and for overweight and obesity and its comorbidities, considering the first 1,000 days of life and its effect over the life course. The activities carried out have been the design and application of 3 digital questionnaires, and the goal of 300 for a sampling error of only 5% has been reached. The obstetricians and neonatologists specially is specified in this pie distribution. Also for the pediatricians, the goal of 300 has been reached, and in this pie distribution, one can see the specialties. Thank you to all the obstetricians, neonatologists, and the pediatricians who answered this survey. And finally, thank you all from our beautiful Caracas Valley.